Oh, thanks, Tiffany. I appreciate that. So, I think most people probably know me. A quick introduction. I'm Carl Peterson with the AICPA. I'm Vice President of Small Firm Interest, and I was saying when I first got on here today, the timing of this is just like perfect. It seems like succession, mergers, acquisitions, all those things is a hot topic these days coming out of the pandemic. And I'm at the Engage conference this week in Vegas, and this morning I actually did a podcast with Accounting Today just on this topic, not on practice continuation agreements, but on succession and mergers and acquisitions for small firms and sole practitioners and the issues related to that. Tomorrow, I'm on a panel with two others talking about succession for the small firms and making sure you're attractive and ready to be, go that direction and ready for merger or acquisition. And I did one other thing the other day too on succession. So this is a hot topic, great time to do it. Heard a lot of things this week about merger and acquisition and people ready to move on. So maybe we should probably give it, I don't know if maybe everybody knows Casey and Chuck in Colorado, but maybe you guys could give a quick introduction, and maybe Chuck, you could introduce yourself.
Okay. Chuck Frederick, live in Durango, Colorado, firm Frederick Zink and Associates. Been doing this for a long time. Actually came to Durango I tell people I picked Fort Lewis College as the place to go to school because it was far away from Denver as I could get and still have in-state tuition. So I ended up here, stayed here. It's been a good career. Been real involved with the Colorado Society and also the Institute, and it's been good for me. So
cool. Casey.
Yeah, Casey Lynch. I am also down in Durango. Am currently an employee of Frederick Zink as of 2 years ago, after, as Carl was leading to, a merger and acquisition that we did. But prior to that, we had a group of us got together and did this business continuity agreement. And I was a sole proprietor for many years, and I was out at Engage, and Carl, we discussed this several times, and I'm looking at a third iteration of the agreement. I've just reread it here again to bring me back to current, and I'm looking at the retirement side of that now. So I am now only working tax seasons for Frederick Zink, sorta, until a client calls, and then we'll see what happens.
There you go. So, this is really the reason that the three of us are on here, because we all have intimate knowledge and experience with business continuity agreements or practice continuity agreements. So I might refer to it as a PCA during the conversation today. But, I'll tell you, Casey had, and his group, and Chuck and their group had this practice continuation agreement that they shared with me years ago. And it is probably the one of the best written agreements that I'd ever seen, and I would use it over the years in my conversations and presentations for the AICPA with members across the country on the need and the value and how maybe you could put one together, because it was a model. And so we're going to talk today, I think, about how that came about, why you put one together, and the success of it. And I also know some others that I've got some experience in conversations to bring, to the conversation about others that have had a practice continuation agreement. There's different models and ways to make it work for you. And then we're going to have a follow-up, I think it's next month, if I remember right. And we're going to have a second in the series on really getting into the specifics of creating that PCA. So today we're going to talk about how Casey and Chuck got there, and some of the nuances, things to look for, things to think about, and go from there. So maybe to get this started, I'll just share real quick that I'm not sure how I want to do this. Let's just jump right into yours, Casey, because what got you motivated to do this? And then I have some questions for you as life went on, as you share this with me, because there's things I like about your PCA, and I think we'll talk about triggering events and all those things. But what got you motivated to create this originally?
Well, Part of it is as a small tax practice, you are very vulnerable. You make so much of your money in probably a 10-week period. And if you cannot work for those 10 weeks, it changes your entire world with that. And so I had a friend who was in a car wreck and became disabled for a while and couldn't work. And if that happened to me during that key window, I was worried that I would lose my practice that I'd spent years and years building. And so the idea kind of was, well, how do I preserve that and make that work? I met with Chuck and we talked. Another CPA in Durango, Ken Levitt, he was part of our group, and there's several others that were in there. And I'm a social butterfly too. I enjoy talking and visiting and going out. And I talked to several other CPAs and said, would you be interested in something like this? And I think the original boilerplate came from the AICPA. And we brought that out, and some of it made sense. Some of it didn't make sense at all for a small firm. And the ones I had seen, a lot of them had been one-on-one. I'll take care of your clients, you take care of mine. But most of us work just a little bit over 40 hours during tax season. I'm being sarcastic because most of us work a lot more than that. And the question is, how could I take on another firm my size and really do justice to my clients or theirs? And I didn't think I could. So started the idea of pulling in folks and found other people in Durango. And we had several folks come and go. Some folks read the agreement and said no. And some said yes.
Yeah, I think that, when you think about PCAs, usually we think about it as that one-on-one, one-for-one type of thing. Like, you and I might enter an agreement to have a PCA, and that I would take over your clients, if a triggering event happened, or you would take over mine. And as a sole practitioner or as a small firm, my firm, when I was in practice, we were 6 people, and we didn't have that kind of capacity necessarily to take over, like Chuck's firm or your firm if we were involved in that. So I think your idea of going into a multi-firm practice continuation agreement is a great idea. What are some of the things that it kind of allowed you to do to give you that comfort level that you could enter into an agreement with a group of people? What was attractive on the multi-firm component of it?
Well, I think a lot of it, again, if somebody had other issues and one person couldn't help, you had multiple people to go to. It was very gracious of Chuck and his firm to join this group because they were a larger firm than the rest of us, and felt they could absorb some capacity as it came in if we had that. And a lot of times, I know people and like people, but you really don't know how people work in a tax practice till you're in the trenches. As Chuck said, we had several folks that we said, those guys may not work with our group because they don't return phone calls or they don't get back to you when you're trying to do something. So it was kind of Chuck and I started. We'd meet and say, well, do you know this person? Well, yeah. And of course, in a small town too, a lot of us, we pick up and lose each other's clients. It's kind of a merry-go-round, and it just happens. Some of it's personality or an issue that came up or price or whatever it is. So small town makes it a little bit different than the big city, but that was the idea. And then again, about taking on too much, as the agreement that I shared, you had to be careful. And if I'm already working 75 hours a week, how am I going to take on some of another CPA firms and really service the clients?
Right.
That was my worry. And so I put some bridles on that in the third iteration of this, just so it wasn't totally overwhelming.
Yeah. Chuck, I'm kind of curious, what were your thoughts at the beginning of this process when, you even considered, being a part of it?
Well, conceptually, what I liked about it is it's really pooled risk.
Yeah.
you're taking whatever amount of risk for each one of us, and you're putting it into a big pool, and you're sharing that in a way that hopefully is not going to be a terrible burden on anybody. You sure, it's going to be more work, and it's going to, in any given time, it might be a little bit inconvenient, but that's a little bit, that is a little bit of what you pay to protect yourself. If I want to be part of the group and I want Carl to help me, what am I putting forth to give to Carl in return for that? Well, by having this pooled group, we could say we're all going to be here for each other. That's just the way it is. Yes, we had a bigger firm, still do, and we could absorb that a lot easier. I felt like that, it protects the, we structured this thing so it covered a number of different situations. One might be a situation with where somebody is just disabled for a couple of months and in the hospital, whatever, and is going to recover. But it also provided protection for situations where somebody, let's say, is permanently disabled, then it's going to protect the spouse. And that was just as important in my mind as the ongoing practice piece of, okay, we're going to jump in and help each other as part of this CPA community, because here's a family that's in need in our community, and we ought to do something. Now, as Carl mentioned, we did have in some initial meetings, and that Casey and I had, and as the group grew, if somebody is not even willing to respond to your idea, or you throw out this idea of let's get together for a beer and talk about this sort of thing, and they can't even bother to get back to you, that kind of gives you an idea of maybe that's not the kind of person you want taking over your practice when if something were to happen to you. So Casey kind of threw out a wide net, and there really were some people that just couldn't be bothered. And as the three of us discussed yesterday, in the last 3 years or 4 years, there have been 2 small practices where those exact things happened. Both of those people chose not to be part of our group years ago. One person died of a heart attack. Another person, severe health issues related to COVID, and is going to have heart surgery. Both only a couple people in the practice, and those things are tough.
Yeah. Wow. That reminds me too. I've had calls within the last 12 months, a couple of different calls from different state societies and practitioners, families where somebody passed away and there was no practice continuation agreement. They had no pathway to move forward, and that impacts not only the family, it impacts the clients, impacts the community, everybody, like you mentioned, in the community, especially if it's a small community. And I think it certainly highlights the importance of the need of this. And you never know when you're going to have that catastrophic event, or any kind of event that maybe sets you as a sole practitioner, especially, sets you out of practice for a month, 2 months, and the timing of it, you just never know when it's going to happen. I don't remember what year it was. We were at an Engage conference. We were at a roundtable session talking just about this specifically. And I can't remember if it was you or somebody said something about that there was a triggering event, or they were part of a group that was a triggering event, and the agreement kicked in, and it helped out. Do you recall that conversation at all?
I don't, no.
Okay. Now, have you guys had it within the group? Did you ever guys have a triggering event where the agreement kicked in and there's helping out of another firm?
Did not. The agreement we have, again, is an annual agreement, and it covers 12 months, and then you have to re-sign by design. And there's been several folks who were part of this agreement that had health issues, but it was outside the window of when this agreement was active.
Okay. Okay. Well, I have, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Quick add-on for what Chuck said too. And, you know, the value of my sole proprietor CPA firm was a part of my retirement plan. And selling that and collecting for that was part of that. And that was something I missed earlier. And that, you know, I'm trying to protect that the best I know how. Like, you know, we're all do a lot of financial planning in our own end. And that was a peace of mind that, holy smoke, if something happened to me, again, what would happen to my spouse, and how would we receive anything for this, or would it just go away?
Yeah, you're right. So yeah, it's interesting. There's different reasons for doing it, right? One is for any kind of catastrophic event. I think the way most PCAs and yours is set up is that if there's an event where a practitioner cannot, you know, service their clients, the group in the agreement agreed to pick up and start working with clients. And you guys had some, like you had, and you kind of alluded to it as well, factors built into the agreement. And I don't know if this is something you guys did at the very beginning or kind of morphed over the 3 iterations of it, and maybe you updated it every year when you recommitted. And that's the other thing I want to point out, by the way, is that, you know, these PCAs are not a forever agreement. So I think having to re-sign and recommit every year gives you the ability to opt out at some point, gives you the ability to make adjustments to the agreement. Maybe your capacity may be better in 1 year versus the other, and that sort of thing. So I think that's important. But did you, when you think about the reasons to have a PCA, one is that, right, to maintain the ability to service clients and have them taken care of. Chuck mentioned, you know, helping the community and the family of that practitioner who's got the issues. And we're not even necessarily talking about death. I mean, even getting to that point, this is important. But, and Casey, then you talked about the value of it from a standpoint of protecting your retirement investment of the firm. I'm just trying to identify the different reasons that somebody would have a PCA. Any other thoughts on that?
Again, I guess when I look back and I just reread this thing again, looking back, and I think a lot of it was trying to do my retirement plan as I was, you know, going through my 40s and 50s, and what do you do? And the value of my firm was a piece of that. How could I get that and plug that value into retirement so we would have that when we retired? And it was solely dependent. Again, I looked at it on me being healthy through that time period. Of course, I had life insurance, but a lot of times my understanding is you're more likely to be disabled than you are to have to get, you know, pass away with that. And so this was just a way to protect what I had built with that in that situation. And even, you know, I mean, car wrecks happen. We've had, I've heard of several peers this year that just for various reasons have had to quit. You know, stress is part of it, COVID's part of it, and it just seems I see it right and left. This is a stressful business, and some people, it's been a tough few years on all of us. So, yeah.
I know. So you ultimately, and you and Chuck ultimately, or Chuck, I should say, Chuck, you know, merged your firm into his at some point. Was there, so the PCA got you together really in a way to a kind of a networking group, a community of practitioners that you got to know each other better and better. Was there, I don't remember in your agreement, was there a triggering event at all to kind of, you know, trigger the event of considering merger, or how did that come about? Was that part of this at all?
No, it really wasn't. It was, I think the benefit we had is Casey and I have known each other for a long time. We've worked on some projects together in the past. Our paths have crossed a lot. And so it wasn't that that wasn't a really tough decision from my standpoint, because I knew Casey and I respected him. Now, the fact that out of that came the decision years later to join forces here, that could have happened with or without the PCA.
Yeah.
The other piece of that is that once we cooked up our deal 2.5 years ago, then nobody else took on the whole concept of the PCA. Everybody else in the group, nobody picked it up and ran with it. So it just went away, because you have to have somebody drive it.
Yeah.
And Casey was the driving force on it. It was important to him. It was important to him in his planning. It was important to him to protect his spouse. And I'm not saying that isn't important to the rest of the people, but maybe they're just feeling a little more invincible than the rest of us. But they just, but I think another thing, our CPA community here is not unlike in a lot of communities, is there's a whole lot of us in their 60s.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
It's a little bit more front of mind that could happen than when you're in your 30s.
Right. Well, for those that are in their 30s that are practitioners, and maybe hopefully they don't think they're invincible, but maybe they could look at a PCA as being an opportunity to have some relationships and potential to not only help the profession and other practitioners in the area, but to, it is a way to potentially grow your practice if another firm had issues, and it's already kind of built in, set up to move forward to pick that
Right.
up.
Carter,
Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on your question too, because in our practitioners, again, continuation agreement, there is a piece in there that if I had become totally disabled, and that if Frederick Zink, Chuck's firm, had picked that up and done tax work for 2 years and paid me 50% of gross proceeds, that essentially those clients became Frederick Zink's. And Frederick Zink would have paid for those. I mean, first of all, they'd have done full work at 50% of what you normally bill. So it would have been tough on them too, and they would have earned it with that. And there was a whole area in here that if they took on the client and then say, I got better after 2 years and could do tax work again, if I took them back, I had to buy them from Frederick Zink. And it was just a protection for both people, the people going in and doing the work at 50% and the other person who was disabled, so that, you wouldn't, somebody pays you for 2 years and then you go back in and your clients come back to you. That is addressed in the agreement, and how people would be compensated.
Yeah, I think you guys had that written extremely well, because I read it with pretty closely, and that protection on both sides of the agreement of two different firms was well done. And I think it's super important, because I think it allows anybody in that PCA to feel comfortable. They're, this is probably not politically correct words to use, but not to feel like they are getting the shaft or the wrong end of the stick here. And it was very well balanced in how you guys determine the payment structure, the the ability, you're right, after 2 years, it was deemed to be one firm's clients, but that didn't mean you couldn't come back into practice and buy them back at at an agreed upon formula and calculation. So it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of ways you can create these PCAs and a lot of components you can have. I'm curious, as you guys think back about this PCA, what are some of the critical components of a PCA that we could talk about today?
Well, defining triggering events is probably the big thing. Another piece of it that we had good discussion on is how to, and you can probably state this better than I can, Casey, but so I pick up a client, Casey gets injured, I pick up a client and I'm working on it. what are my limitations in terms of what I can bill that client? I mean, yes, I'm going to have to pay Casey 50%, but I can't turn around and bill them some totally different amount for basically the same type of tax return. And so we had good discussions about that. And I think the discussions were the important part because we have more of a tiered structure in our firm. We have interns and 1 to 3 year type of people and mid-level people and partners. And so our rate structure as a whole is totally different than Casey's.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean the end product is going to be significantly different? No.
Right.
But we had those discussions, and I think that just helped us be comfortable with each other in terms of what would happen going forward. You have some thoughts on that, Casey?
I again just looked at the agreement, and I think a lot of it was based on the prior year billing. So if Casey Lynch became disabled, then Frederick Zink would do that tax return, and the billing would be similar to what it was the prior year, with exceptions. If a client came on with a totally new, a whole bunch of different stuff in there, it had to be negotiated and talked about. But aside from that, you'd look at the prior year, and that was going to be close to what your billing was the following year if it was similar.
Yeah, I remember that in there. I just think you can create a PCA that protects each firm that's in there and their clients in a way that the clients. I think actually even it's a possibility that if somebody's injured and unable to do some work, the client may or may not even know that there's been much happening behind the scenes to have another firm do the work. But you're protecting them from sticker shock or fee shock or something's totally changing and not being able to feel like they are being taken care of in the way they had before. Yeah.
Carl, there's a piece to that you have to be very careful of, and it's the standards out there by the AICPA, and the client really needs to know if their CPA is not handling it and another one is, and they have to give written permission to make that happen. You just can't subcontract it out without their permission, and that has to be done up front, and hopefully with the disabled CPA or their representative and the group CPA who's taking it on, that everybody's communicating, and you're saying, this is temporary, but the client has to sign on that before you transfer information.
Yeah. And I guess my reference is really more to the client's going to feel like they're taken care of in the same manner as before, and not feel like all of a sudden this big firm, in Chuck's case, is taking over and billing me out at something that I'm just not expecting. So yeah, but you're right, absolutely. All that information it has to be transferred. What are was there anything unique in the triggering events? Did you guys have? I don't have the PCA in front of me. What were some of the triggering events in your PCA?
I read through it, and Chuck, please jump in if you need to. But it was really the disabled. Partially total disabled CPA, they triggered it, or their spouse or their office manager. So they were the ones pulling the trigger. There was really nothing else out there. They needed to say, okay, we're ready to go, and I'm disabled for whatever reason with that, and that would trigger the event. Okay.
And there was a time period too then, right? Once you had a triggering event, there was a response period built into the agreement that everybody agreed to, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, you need, again, in a small community, everybody's going to know if somebody passes away or if they've been in a car wreck or other things. They may not know about health issues, but it was a pretty quick time frame to make sure that we had that list distributed, and that it was, and I'm going to pretend it's a disability for this conference, but there's some clients might work better with one CPA firm than another. And if you're the disabled CPA, you could say, well, these should go here and these should go here, and do that and get that out there pretty quickly before that client made their own decision to move on to somebody else, and try to keep that covered. So yeah, there was a pretty strict time frame. And again, how much you would take on. I think in this latest version here, the version is that I would take on up to 25 clients, unless it was after September 1st, and then I'd only take on 10 clients, so that you weren't bombed later in the year when you had that going.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I think a lot of thought went into that. So you can really, and everybody can have a different capacity, right? So you had your setup that you could take on 25 clients, depending on the dates and all those things.
Well, and
you do more, right?
The agreement set up, that was the minimum. So for example, Chuck could sign this same agreement and with Frederick's Inc., and if they chose to take on 50 clients, that was fine. But we all agreed to take on at least this minimum, and that spread our load around.
Okay. So some of the important components of a PCA has been, one, triggering events. These are not necessarily in a particular order. Triggering events, fees charged to client, payments and the terms to paying the disabled firm for those clients, and then also that disabled CPA became able to come back. There was components within the PCA on how they could get back in and take those clients back over. There's response times and expectations, and how much you would take on in a minimum. So and one of the questions come up in the chat is one of the notes I have on here. Your PCA was with firms, I think, all in the Durango area. And there's a lot of comfort, I think, in doing it in your local community. But with having gone through the pandemic and telecommuting and technology today, do you think this PCA concept would work with firms outside your local community as well?
Depends on your client base, but yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think it could work. One of the things that we discussed and really, I think Casey's attention to detail helped with this a lot was, okay, you can't just sign this thing. You have to have a plan in place for who has your passwords. How are we going to get into your system? How do we even know what your system is? Somebody on your side, if you're going to sign this agreement, somebody on your side has to know all that stuff, because otherwise it's just going to be impossible to do. And that, in fact, has happened with one person in town here who had COVID. Was his spouse didn't even know how to get into the system.
What a nightmare. Huh.
And he wasn't returning calls to any clients, and people were, and the poor guy was just in bad shape.
Yeah.
So even just the discussing that as a group was really profitable, I felt like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I was just thinking, you made me think about, in today's environment, I would suspect most practitioners' data is all electronic. Not, there's probably no paper files. I was thinking, you gotta have some sort of agreement that you would have access to the files of the disabled practitioner, but yet, as long as you have the passwords, you should have that access, right? As long as somebody's able to give you that password access once the triggering event happens, you should be okay, whether it's paper or electronic. And maybe today it's even easier being electronic to a certain extent. So,
some other things we addressed in there was, what if this isn't just a matter of picking up and doing a tax return that's going to come in next month, but what if a return was already partially done? What if it was 80% done? How are we going to, so we had a proportionate fee structure in there also, so that anything that was in process at the time would also be dealt with in a reasonable way so that it benefited both people.
Did that cover, did you have things in there at all? Like, not all firms maybe do certain types of work. You know, maybe some firms don't do any financial reporting. Was that covered in there?
It was. Again, a lot of our work was based on tax. So there was no attestation agreement in here that did not cover that. Also, you know, if let's pretend I came into another firm and they had some issues in there and we had to subcontract out their bookkeeping or some other thing with that, then that could be done. And I would get paid a fee for kind of being the quarterback of getting all the bookkeeping done, even if it was through other bookkeepers. And that was one way to do that. And one other thing we had is, you know, we had it two ways. I actually took all the information back to my office and prepped the return. You know, we talked about 50% of fees. The other thing we had is, and the vision of this is, if I went to somebody else's office 2 days a week and just met with all their clients one after the other, the agreement we had in there was they could handle all, you know, their office and their office staff could handle all the billing and everything else. And they would pay out, in our agreement, it was $150 an hour to me for the time while I was sitting in their office working with their clients. And then they would do all the billing, the collecting, all of that stuff. And I would just get paid a flat fee for, you know, in this case, you know, comforting the client, going down the list of questions, getting everything in the software, and hoping to heck it was the same software that I use.
And basically practice management.
Right. You were actually ultimately in that as managing the practice to keep it going, even if you may not been doing the return specifically. You may have been working with the staff and clients. Is that what you're referring to, Chuck?
Yes. And as a part of the group, I think we were the only person in the group or firm in the group who was doing any financial statement work.
Okay.
There might have been a few people who did some compilations, but we're the only firm that was doing reviews and audits and AUPs. So that was not a part of this agreement. You know, there wasn't a need for it to be. Nobody else had it, and I know I have an audit partner and an audit staff, so there wasn't any need for it from my standpoint. Yeah.
You know, it seems today that there's less and less small firms do any type of attest work. You know, compilations. There may be some doing some reviews, but compilations and financial reporting may be all they're actually doing. So maybe the need for that audit attest capability in the PCA is not that big a deal. But you could though, is you look for firms to join the PCA. It sounds like some of the most important components of the firms that might be involved in it is that, and you guys add on to this, I think is, you know, willingness to be committed for one, a firm that everybody's comfortable with, or, you know, especially those who's leading the PCA and keeping the thing together and keep it moving forward so everybody has protection, but firms that you can count on being of a certain level of quality or style of work, and that sort of thing is important as it relates to your clients, and probably important as to how well maybe that firm will interact with your representative if you happen to be the one being disabled. What are some of the other, and I suppose you could think about then firms that maybe have a certain amount of diversity, or what other components would you think is important when you think about trying to find a group of firms to participate? What might be the attributes of those firms you'd like to have in your group?
Well, I think I would start with good communication. That is just a huge piece. And we had the benefit, I think, being in a smaller area like we are, that we might know each other a little better than than if you were in the Denver area. For many years, of course, we used to have to actually show up to CPE. And so the society was gracious enough to have X many days of CPE down here, and people took advantage of it. So generally, at least a couple times a year, you're in a class with a number of local practitioners. And so, not to be, I don't want to say this in an unkind way, but you find people that you're going, man, I'm glad I don't work with that person.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the kind of person you're going to want as a part of your agreement, because you're potentially turning over your clients to them.
Yeah.
And this leads a lot to collaboration, and I know we all struggle with that as CPAs too, but participate in our area. It was the college had an interaction where CPAs could go there. The Colorado Society, even if you're doing meeting the chair and they come down, and then the CPE, that's where you build these relationships that can lead to an agreement where you get to know some of these people with that. And a lot of times I think sometimes we get in our own world and just run in our own squirrel cage there. But I think a lot of times if we would get to know these other people, opportunities can come up if you have that relationship built.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you could have, especially in today's environment, practitioners outside of your community participate that you really trust and value, and they're going to do a good job. But I think you also have to look at your clientele, right? If your clientele may be such that they wouldn't appreciate that, you might be, think twice about that. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well. I don't think you're limited today to being just in your local community, though that's probably the best place to start. Yeah.
I agree. And through my involvement with committees and different things with the society, there are a number of practitioners there that if I was a small shop, I would have not hesitated for a minute to start discussing with them the possibilities of this kind of in today's environment, that kind of agreement, because I felt comfortable with who they were. I wouldn't have had a problem with it. And I don't think most of the clients would have either. There's obviously got to be some good communication on if there's disabled or death, some good communication from whoever is taking the lead on that person's behalf of saying, I have somebody here. Now, obviously, if it's a death situation, there's no potential of coming back. And so you would say, that client also might be in a situation where they want to find somebody closer to them or in their own community or whatever. But in this community anymore, in this remote working, for somebody to say, this is somebody I trust and can refer my clients to, that goes a long ways.
Yeah. And I think we all know somebody. We all know other CPAs who are not necessarily in our community that we respect and trust, who they are. So yeah, I think you're right.
Absolutely.
That PCPS group was the same way. What a group of amazing individuals around the country. But once you develop that relationship, and that group was some amazing folks, and you develop that trust, and that they would do what they say they would do. And I think that's the end line right there, that you got to have somebody you trust that they would actually follow up and follow the terms of the agreement. Yeah.
Well, yesterday, Casey, we had a roundtable discussion, and how we separate everybody by size of firms. The sole proprietor group was the largest group, and when they spoke and reported out, they had just met each other. Nobody knew each other, and they said, "This is the best group ever." And I think that's a sign of what small firm sole practitioners are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very dedicated to each other and trying to help everybody do the right thing.
Absolutely.
In the chat, somebody asked about getting a sample of a PCA, and I think during the next session and the second section, we will have, we can provide examples. I don't know that we can provide Casey's exact example, though we may talk about that before next time. One of the things that, we've been talking about a multi-person agreement. I just wanted to share with you, in the last couple of years, I became aware of another practitioner who had a PCA. It was a one-to-one relationship, and it was one to large. So they were a smaller firm, and I think they had created their PCA maybe, I don't remember, maybe about the same time as you guys did. It's been, I think they had it in place 10 years or so. And it was one to protect the smaller firm. They had a relationship with a larger firm, entered into the agreement, and they updated and renewed it every year, recommitted. And he had created this PCA for the same reasons, and he kept thinking about retiring, and he thought maybe he's going to retire, not early, but maybe at some point it might be time to merge into a larger practice as part of his long-term succession and retirement strategy. And but he never pulled the trigger. They had a triggering event, and I don't recall exactly what the triggering event is that he had, but he could push back on the large firm, say, I'm ready to make this deal. And they had kind of renegotiated the deal every year in the terms of, as far as, what they would be looking at, what the due diligence would be. And but he had this agreement with this larger firm, and ultimately pulled that trigger a couple of years ago. And as many of us are getting older, in our 60s and things like that, that need to pull that trigger is getting more likely. And he pulled it, and it is a PCA that ended up working out pretty well. That he didn't have to go searching for another firm to merge up into, didn't have to go through all that, dancing of like, is this the right firm or not? Because they ultimately built that relationship. And I think that, like you guys did, you built relationships with other practitioners, that you had a PCA and you had a group of firms that you were comfortable with. For him, he did it strictly for retirement, but he also had triggering events in case he was disabled. They would take over and do very similar things that you guys had done in your PCA.
On my agreement, I need to check with the other people who signed this, but if they're okay with it, Colorado Society has a copy, and I'm fine with it going out. But let me call everybody and make sure they're all okay with it. It's 2 years old, expired, but
we could redact their names, by the way, Casey. So we can make sure that no firm is identified. It's just the structure and components in the
check with folks and make sure that's okay with them.
Yeah.
And I think the first year we did the agreement was the end of 2014.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
To cover the next year.
Yeah. So as you guys look back and think about having been part of a practice continuity agreement, you think about practice today, and probably because we've all been in the profession for so long, we know of practitioners and maybe even people on this call today that might be similar age categories, or been in the profession as long as we have. What are some of the importance that, how important do you think it is to have a PCA, I guess, is my ultimate question.
Well, I think some of that depends on what your end goals are for you and your practice. If you're the kind of person that, well, I'm just going to whittle it down, and when I finally turn off the lights, I turn it off. I'll slow down a little bit every year, and someday it'll all be over. Maybe that continuation agreement isn't a big deal. But I think at least for our group, the important thing was most people there didn't have anybody else in their firm that could pick up the pieces and make it run and really keep probably one of their largest estate assets going. And even if it was just a temporary disablement of 2-6 months, I mean, Casey falling down a mountain skiing, that he'll recover from, but for a little while he's going to be laid up. So it's just that protection piece that I think is just so important to think about in terms of your own life and your own asset that you're building.
Yeah, that was key for me, I think. And again, it was a piece of my retirement plan. And it was a way I could protect it, kind of, I mean, why you buy life insurance, why you do the other things we do to create a financial plan. And this was a piece of it. And that's where I came in. That I needed to guard this because it could go away if something happened to my health.
Isn't it also a way to protect your family and your estate to a certain extent, to move forward? And then, we're such caregivers to our clients. We take care of our clients. It's probably one of those last opportunities to take care of your clients when you're disabled and you can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Yeah. Any other important components that you think we should talk about, or you think that people would be interested in knowing about a PCA? One thing I will mention too, I think there was a state years ago, and I don't know if they still have it. It was for law firms, and this surprised me. I'm surprised we didn't have the requirement for CPA, but for law firms, they had to have a continuity partner identified for their license, and they had to re-identify them every year that they got their license to practice law. And I think it was like Tennessee or somebody. The other thing is that, we have what we call members in practice outside of the United States, and our members in practice that are of AICPA are required to have a continuity partner. So, some sort of agreement has to be in place, and they have to identify them each and every year that they renew their license.
I guess, Carl, you asked about other components of this. And one of the last components we had is if there was a disagreement, it went to arbitration. And the arbitration part would be each people who had a disagreement would choose a CPA to represent them. And the two CPAs would go together and see if they could come to a solution. And if they couldn't, the two arbitrators would pick a third CPA, and that arbitration was binding and final on how the agreement plays out.
Yep. No, that's a good component of it too. And we will get into all those components, I think, the next time. So I don't know if Susan Follender had her hand up first and we should call in her, or this was in the chat, but I'll hit the chat really quick. Somebody asked about how large is your PCA? How many firms did you have involved in that? Was it like 5 different firms?
In our group, it was the one I'm looking at has 5. 1, 2, 3. Excuse me, 6. There were 6 involved in this one. But again, over the years, I'm looking at 2019. Chuck said we started in 14, but my recollection is we had up to 7 and then down to 5 some years. It just depended on the year because some people didn't, chose not to stay or moved on for other reasons. So it was kind of a moving target.
Do you think there's an optimal number of firms to be involved, or a number that's, not high enough or too high?
Well, I would think with smaller firms like this, if you got too large of a group, it's going to be difficult to coordinate.
Yeah.
That would be my concern. We had 7 back on the 2014 agreement. I did find some emails here going back into a year before at the end of 13. I don't know whether we actually signed an agreement that year or it took us a whole year to hammer this out. But I noticed on one of these early ones that one of the individuals who later became disabled was on the original agreement, but chose not to continue.
Yeah. Wow.
For whatever reason.
Yeah. Jim, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. You have your hand up. Maybe I think they can speak if they take themselves off mute.
Yes, absolutely.
Jim, do you have a question, a comment? Anybody else too? That we'd be happy to take some.
I don't know from my end if I can see hands or not.
Yeah, I could see a hand on his. The other person, their hand, they either dropped off or their hand dropped off. So
Disabled.
Hopefully the PCA kicks in. Well, aren't you? Go ahead.
I'll ask a question if I may. Yeah. Mary Medley with the Society. What's the one most important step people should take first?
Well, who's going to jump on that?
I think, to Casey's credit, you got to have one person who wants to drive this thing. Because if you're going to do this as a committee, it'll probably be like a lot of committees we've been on that have trouble getting to the finish line. But to have one person that this is important to them for whatever reason, they're going to have to drive it.
Yeah. I think it'll never get done without that one person driving it. I think you're right.
And I kind of took that role on, and again, because it was important to me, but my vision of this is if any one of them went down, I would be the one knocking on their door in their office and then contacting the other members here and saying, hey, you have to step up now. You signed this thing, come and do this. But yeah, I kind of drove it and pushed it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think the 7 people that we had initially in the group was pretty manageable.
Yeah.
It wasn't terribly difficult to get people together. Of course, Casey lured us in initially by buying us beer one night, but at a local brew pub. So that also just got us to talking a little bit better, I think.
Yeah. And ultimately, entering a PCA, I would assume, is really just peace of mind, right? You ultimately had some peace of mind that your asset, your firm, was somewhat protected.
Mm-hmm.
Very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
We actually ended up about 3 or 4 years ago handling the estate of another CPA who passed away and was divorced, and I'm not sure that his son ever got into his files.
Wow. Wow. A lot of tragedies out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of tragedies and events out there that looking back, had they been part of a PCA, it would have been good for everybody.
Well, and even just the part of he would have communicated more with somebody else about the state of his practice, what he's doing, where things are located. He was actually in California riding a bike.
Wow.
Got hit by a car.
Wow. 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 Boy, on that high note, we're coming to the end of this. But I think the next time, like I say, we're going to get into specifics of the PCA, the components, maybe some of the thought processes that went behind each one as we look at it. And we should have, whether it's Casey's version or an AICPA version, we can make sure that there's a copy for people to, but hopefully we can get Casey's, because that was probably the most tweaked one, because I think it shows you can adjust these to make it whatever it is that fits the group's needs and what you're really trying to accomplish. So Tiffany or Mary, I don't know if we had any other things we needed to cover. I think we're coming up to the end of the hour.
And
Yeah.
Tiffany, could people email if they think of things between now and the second one? Could they just email you questions, ideas, thoughts, things they want us to cover?
Yes, I would absolutely love that. So I'm going to throw my email address in the chat right now, and please feel free to reach out with any questions or thoughts or that sort of thing.
Or maybe they want to know when they can come down and play golf with me on this lovely course behind me.
Don't ask me. I'm not going. I'll ski with you, Chuck. No.
Okay.
Casey, what were you going to say?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, I think that asking questions will be great, because we can make sure we focus on the needs and concerns that anybody has on here and be ready for that when we come back for the next session, and make sure we hit on the things that are important to you.
Absolutely. And that next session is July 13th, again, from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. So please feel free to join us for that. You can register on our website. And if you have any questions or if you need anything, my contact information is in the chat. And we will look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.